We have spent millennia refining our philosophies and technologies, yet the core of the human experience remains remarkably unchanged. Beneath our progress, most of us still live with a deep sense of fear, conflict, and a nagging feeling of isolation. This isn't a failure of character, it's a byproduct of our biology. The human ego functions as a survival mechanism, and to do its job, it must constantly define and defend boundaries to protect its fragile sense of self. This survival drive creates a cognitive glitch called dualism. Our minds act like a prism, taking a unified reality and forcibly fracturing it into opposing categories: subject versus object, me versus you. Spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle, seen here, suggests that our compulsive, non-stop thinking is the primary tool of this fragmentation. This mental stream constantly desubstantializes the world, breaking a single, living reality into a series of lifeless, separate fragments. The result is a solipsistic worldview. We begin to feel like insular islands, lonely entities floating in an infinite and often hostile void. But if this feeling of deep isolation is a product of our psychological and biological lenses, then it isn't an unchangeable truth. The tragedy of the human condition may actually be a curable distortion of our perception. This is Deepak Chopra, who often draws on the ancient Vedic tradition to explain how this distortion works. Centuries ago, these mystics were already documenting the same psychological walls we struggle with today. They used the metaphor of a clay jar. The physical walls of the jar create an artificial distinction between the space inside it and the space outside it, even though the space itself is one continuous, indivisible whole. The presence of the clay makes the inside feel unique and separate. Alchemy uses a similar logic of form versus substance. A golden ring is just a temporary shape. When it melts down, the ring disappears, but the unified substance of the gold remains. The form was just a temporary way for the substance to express itself. We can apply this directly to ourselves. Our ego builds these same artificial walls of identity, our names, our jobs, our social status, to divide our individual consciousness from the broader reality. Ancient traditions from completely different cultures arrived at this same premise. The boundaries we use to define our individuality are not inherent properties of the universe, but constructs we've built to navigate it. While mystics used metaphors, modern science eventually began to find empirical evidence for this same lack of separation. These are the pioneers of quantum mechanics, who discovered that at the most basic level, the universe doesn't behave like a collection of separate parts. This is Niels Bohr. He observed that at the subatomic level, the components of matter are so deeply interlinked that they cannot be understood as isolated entities. Werner Heisenberg, seen here, realized that the very idea of isolated objects breaks down when you look at the quantum scale. This led to the discovery of quantum entanglement and non-locality. It's a proven phenomenon where two particles, regardless of the distance between them, remain so intimately connected that a change in one is reflected in the other instantly. Rather than a void filled with separate things, quantum field theory suggests the universe is more like a single, unbroken web of interacting energy. The objects we see are just localized peaks in that unified field. This is where two very different tracks of human thought converge. Whether through ancient meditation or subatomic physics, the conclusion is the same. The perceived boundaries between us do not exist in the underlying fabric of reality. If both physics and philosophy suggest that the space inside our ego is identical to the space outside, how does that change our lives? How should it alter how we treat one another? If the universe is a truly interconnected field, then every action ripples through the entire system. When we interact with another person, we aren't reaching across a gap to a separate entity. We are influencing a different part of the same continuous whole. In this light, the distinction between self and other becomes a matter of perspective. Aggression or kindness toward another is effectively an exchange within the same system. If the boundary is an illusion, then our interests are not competing, they are shared. This shifts how we think about social harmony. As Joel Goldsmith explores in The Art of Meditation, represented here by these wildflowers, we may not need to create unity from the outside. If unity is the underlying physical and spiritual baseline, then it is something we recognize rather than something we manufacture. The prescription, then, is to stop actively reinforcing the walls. If we can step back from the analytical ego and become quiet observers of our own thoughts, the artificial boundaries begin to thin. A moment of wonder. When the artificial jar finally shatters, the feeling of isolation goes with it. We move from being a separate, lonely fragment back into the realization that we have always been part of the entirety of the whole.